Hi, I'm Akshaya, and welcome to When We Design, a podcast where we collectively explore South Asian points of view in design research. In conversation with designers, we unpack philosophies, perspectives, and contributions that influence how we practice design in our diverse contexts. Today's podcast is in collaboration with DesignAct, a volunteer-driven movement that believes in the power of design to shape better futures. While their roots are in Sri Lanka, they practice and teach design all around the world. They're sparking critical conversations on design and strive to create a safe and inclusive space for debate and discourse.
Hi, I'm Alethea. Today we're speaking to Mashal Khan, a strategic designer, visual ethnographer, and researcher based in Lahore, Pakistan. Through her work, she's building a relational view of caring for humans, animals, ecosystem, and the artifice. Mashal views the world with a sense of wonder, humility, and respect, while designing for new ideas and action agendas. An alumnus of the Transdisciplinary Design program at Parsons School of Design, she currently heads strategic communication, learning sharing, and innovation at Kaarvan Craft Foundation, a nonprofit that focuses on the right to a dignified livelihood for women in rural Pakistan. In today's conversation, we talk about her practice, what it means to work with communities, and navigating the power dynamics that arise as a designer working with craftspeople.
Okay, cool. Hi all, hi Mashal. Thanks for joining us. So I'm Alethea, and I'm a design researcher currently based, Sri Lankan design researcher, but currently based out of Bangalore in India. And with me are Akshay and Vedahi. Maybe we can start with quick intros, and then we can pass it on to Mashal.
Yeah, hi everyone. And hi, Mashal. This is Vedahi Sipadkar, and I'm a design researcher, again, based in Boston, but originally from India. Nice to meet you and excited to kind of have this conversation with you today.
Hey everyone, this is Akshaya. I am also a design researcher of sorts, but I also mostly work in the realm of pedagogy design as of now. I am super excited for this conversation and to hear Mashal say more.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for connecting. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you all. I am Mashal. I'm working here in Lahore right now for a non-for-profit organization called Kaarvan Craft Foundation. So I am the design researcher over here, and I kind of look at all the communications and like creative work that goes over in the organization for rural women.
Thank you. Really excited to have this conversation with you. Maybe through this, in this next hour, we are hoping to hear more about what doing design research in Karachi means, what does that look like in your context, and also thinking about how are we able to reframe and expand and broaden what design research means when we start practicing in the context that we are living in right now. And also, on the other hand, what is it that we can contribute from a South Asian perspective and a lens to the broader scope of design research that currently gets spoken about in maybe even the academic settings, but also largely in more of a practice-based setting itself. Mashal, is there anything you're reading these days or thinking about that will set us off with this conversation?
I'm reading these days Consumed by Ajay Babar. It's on capitalism, consumership, and the garment workers and how you need to be more sensitive of your consumption around climate change, etc. So I kind of keep like you guys try to keep my transdisciplinary design thinking alive, even though I'm in Pakistan and it's actually based out of Lahore. So I think regarding my practice, I think transdisciplinary design kind of really gave me a lot of avenues to think, how, especially the participatory action research design of how to co-design with the communities. I think that is the one part that I am still using to this day. So all the learning that I received from transdisciplinary design, I'm kind of using those frameworks, etc., localizing it here. And I'm kind of grateful that I have like a very supportive team, and like the leadership that in the organization that I'm working for kind of gives me a lot of agency to do these kind of like social experiments and like with the artisans. So my role in Kaarvan is that I kind of firstly is just like dive into the field and like meet the micro entrepreneurs, the rural women, with a kind of a lens of like non-judgment, like really deeply listen to what they're saying. And then so I think initially when I started off my work with Kaarvan, I just like, it was more like listening and observing. And then afterwards, once I kind of understood how things were going on, then I started designing more of these like co-design activities using culture probes, etc., to see, because I noticed one thing when you talk about difficult topics like patriarchy or gender violence or any of these social topics, like sometimes women don't know when you're talking in a focus group and you just ask them a question, they just freeze. But through the notion of like doing design activities or creative workshops, or the notion of play of like the guards are more down there, they're like, okay, it's just not, this question is not directly at me, but at the wider community. So people are much more engaged and open, and like you kind of build a relationship of trust, because you're not just asking them, but you're being vulnerable yourself and sharing stories of your past and how you came to this day. So that kind of just helps facilitates the conversation much more. So I do that. And then so that's at a rural level, but then we also do a lot of work with the youth, etc., to just kind of getting a different perspectives. So so we do a lot of that, and then the reporting, etc. So there are like a lot of tiers that I work on for like different levels. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. How would you describe your journey leading up to this kind of space of working at Kaarvan and applying all these kind of participatory and you mentioned co-design methods? Like, what was your journey like to start this practice or even hear about it? Because a lot of times these like methods and tools not many know of.
Yeah. I think initially, since birth or childhood, I've always been like a visual person. I was always attracted to like colors and design, etc. So in my bachelor's, I started with like choosing visual communication, then stumbled onto graphic design. So after graduating from bachelor's, I kind of joined the corporate industry of, like the advertising agencies like Leo Burnett, and then more towards like also like Discovery Channel, etc. But I was also always missing that notion, because I think when I was in the bachelor's, you always have this, like it's very open-ended brief. So like intuitively, I had always chosen notions of like climate change or like animal rights when I was in my bachelor's. So I was missing the aspect of the social aspect. I'm like, okay, I'm working for a big brand, or I'm designing for McDonald's or for Coca-Cola, or from anything, but it's not actually giving back to the community or to the society, and just going towards a brand. So that's what kind of made me started searching on Google, looking for a master's degree, because like I still like design, but I wanted to do design for like a bigger purpose. So that's how I stumbled across. One of the options was Transdisciplinary Design at Parsons School. So that's what kind of landed me up in Parsons, and then over in Parsons kind of just opened up much more, because I was a much more shy and like introverted individual. But I think through those whole like participatory designs and like the whole like journey within like Transdisciplinary Design as well, like meeting like such kind-hearted kindred souls like you guys, I just kind of like opened up much more. And then after the 2 years, I could see there was like a lot of good like creative souls and thinking that was happening in USA and in New York. So I was just wondering what it would be looking like if I brought all this thinking, etc., and with myself to Pakistan, and just started randomly searching on Google for like non-for-profit or NGOs that were working in this space. So I hadn't confined myself to like poverty or like women empowerment in that time. I was just like very open, like whether it's climate change or whether it's healthcare, I was just like looking for good organizations. So I think through the interview process and going through the thing, I came upon Kaarvan, and I kind of liked their theory of change was like educated in life skills, enabled to earn, empowered to decide. So I'm like, this kind of theory of change kind of looks like their thinking is already somewhat aligned with Transd. So maybe since their terminology is so similar to me, maybe they would be much more open. I think what I really liked about this organization and the space is that they give not only a lot of creative agency to the team, but also to the women as well. So I like the notion of like you in your, like in front of you, see like direct impact happening, whether it's at livelihoods or the community level. Obviously, it doesn't reach a very systemic level at the policy level, but you see a lot of change happening before your eyes. And what I noticed in the other spaces I worked at, mostly it just stays like a lot of 1 year spent on like good, solid, rigorous design research, but then it just stays at like a recommendation level, because then you have to give it back to the other people, and then it's up to them whether they take up your notions and recommendations and bring it into actual things. So that kind of gets like, it's like all this research, and if it doesn't come into implementation, what's kind of the point?
So this is really great to hear, and thanks for sharing also a little bit about the type of work you're doing. You had shared a project with us which was called Constellations of Change. I'll share really quickly, and maybe you can talk us through this. But as we also talk through this, it'll be great to hear what the like context that you're working with in Pakistan looks like, in terms of what are maybe some of the considerations, the primary considerations y'all are having when y'all are doing design research work. What is maybe especially when you've made this transition from studying within like a Transd program in the US context and then shifting back to Pakistan, how has that maybe shifted, and what are the things that you need to look at differently that you're now in Pakistan?
So yeah, I think what you're looking at right now is not a project, it's actually a framework that we use on a monthly basis. So there's international UN days, and then in order to do these participatory activities, not just with the rural people, but also kind of the bridging exercise with the urban youth. So we use these days, like I created this framework out of the SDGs that the United Nations has developed, and just kind of selected 8 that are like pertinent to Kaarvan. And then when we do these days, it's like the one that's coming up is International Small Business and Micro Enterprises. That's coming up on June 27th. And that kind of leads to this one of, what is it? Like gender equality, like SDG 5. So we have that in the back of our mind. And we're talking about just not how the rural women are, so share the contributions of the UN rural women and connect these rural women with the youth and see what the youth's perspective is around small business. And kind of so through dialogue, they get familiarized with each other and kind of break those assumptions and myths that they might have of the rural community. This is just kind of one of the frameworks that we use when we're kind of doing these days. So this is more like internally and more like partner-facing things. So we share this with our donors that are UN Women and the Target Foundation, so they know like, okay, when we're doing this activity, it's in sync with this.
So, Mashal, when you said you localized a particular framework, could you maybe just say a little bit more in terms of what localizing, say, for instance, like how do you kind of take something and then adapt it to the place and people that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's just like, these SDGs are supposed to be global and international. So I think it's just seeing like, okay, like SDG 4 is about quality education. So when I design activities, if you go to the next one that's more interactive image. So you can see this one is like SDGs, like reduce inequalities, and how are we reducing thing is just like we had half of this image that you see there, the deer one was like we left it blank. Half was filled by a rural women, and then the other half, this is like filled by a Beacon House University student, and it's just like how they are filling the images, how are they connecting, etc. So it's like through conversation and through dialogue, they are like, you are reducing the inequalities of judgment and making each other much more open to us. And so I'm like looking at what the UN is looking for, but then also seeing how can we localize it for this organization. So yeah, this is also another example of like how the drawings being filled together. Like some of them we did give to international people to fill out, but most of them done locally. So there's a few that have been gone from abroad. So it's just like whether you do it with poetry or whether you do it with drawing, it depends like which ones are being connected.
To also share a similar, in line with what Akshaya asked, these frameworks that you've shared, which I think will help us also understand, maybe for the audience that also is less familiar with design research work. But also I think this was a really good example you shared of what does it mean to like localize a framework. So I'm going to just share that as we keep speaking through this.
Yeah, so I think this framework is mostly internal. So it's like used for like the organization knows it and like the leadership knows of it. And like I said before, this like use external facingly, like so our partners know of it, so like they know when we're doing field work, okay, they might be well versed, like understanding when I explain it to them in the report. It says like what I mean by human-centered design. I won't be spewing this terminology when I go in the field. I'll be more like, okay, we're here to talk about like International Days of Women and just do some interactive activities, or talk to you more about why we don't speak up today. So the notion of like rights and when we speak up or when do we stay silent. But at the back of the mind, this is kind of what the framework is guiding us. But I won't be speaking this to, because most of the people, even Pakistan, don't know what human-centered design is or design research is. So this is mostly for reporting for people who are more like educated and privileged, can understand this framework. So they kind of know like, okay, first is kind of building trust with the community. And when you enter the field, it's kind of first, you don't with the mind of jumping in with the solution, but kind of observing, listening to what the needs are, what the challenges of the community are, and then going back to the head office, discussing with the team, kind of unpacking like co-design activities that you want to engage with the community to get more insights, etc. And then kind of go do those activities with the field, then come back the women. So they are at the heart of design and development, etc. But then we kind of communicate and being very mindful and cautious of how and what is being communicated to them, and then sharing back with them, etc. too. So the last one that you see is co-evolve was it was basically I taken like the constitution and the rights of the women in Pakistan and just shared that section with them in Urdu, and had given them like, okay, these are your rights, etc. Do you feel like in the language, etc., there's something missing or something that you might want to reword? So then we just kind of save it and then shared with the partners like, hey, these are the actual voices from the women who are saying like, okay, now that they're well aware of the rights, they feel like they might want to reword it in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating how you kind of like go beyond just kind of co-creation and collaboration to then they're almost like self-determining. They're like what they want to be identified as, or maybe self-determining like their practice or like how they feel safe. So I was just curious about like if you can speak more about like collaboration and kind of the co-creation part that you mentioned with communities. How do they participate?
So yeah, I think it's like before entering the field, just having the activities designed and knowing like so what purpose, etc. And like a group of like have this discussion and unpacking. Okay, we're going for this day and like for this purpose and training and activity. So like we internally are in sync of like what activities are going to be happening, how is it going to be communicated, etc. And then when we go down in the field, on the wall, I just hang the culture probes there and then kind of communicate. You had your trainings on business trainings, finance, design intervention, and like digital, like how to use the phone to like market yourself. So out of these trainings, which ones you think are most practical and you're applying right now in your life? And then just like from there, so it's more interactive too. So it's just not like saying, like asking like a survey question, like, hey, I just want you to fill out the survey, but then also using like giving them like imitation money, like when you earn an income, does it go mostly on the house, etc. So those are how we engage with them. Or when it's more like play based and like role modeling, so just so to see like how would they like advocate for themselves and market themselves, and not letting like someone in the more powerful position like demean their craft or their stuff.
Really great to hear. Okay, so curious to know about how or what are these conversations that you all are having with them, and how are they also responding to this? Because I think the broader narrative around craft and craft artisans is also, at least in South Asia, is very much like there's a fairly large distinction between what like we are claiming as like designers versus also then craft artisans, when in so many ways the type of work like a design, when I'm saying design in this case, I'm also speaking about like material and product design in that sense. And in craft artisans are also doing very similar work, where it is they are the ones who are designing and creating these own pieces. But in some contexts, the craft artisan has been very much reduced to a labor and like someone who's producing something, and then there's someone else who's designing, and there's a whole power hierarchy that has been created. I'm curious to know what are the conversations in that sense that you all may be having at Kaarvan, and also how these translate. I mean, you've given examples of how you're shifting that narrative, but how are also the artisans you work with responding?
So yeah, I think it's Kaarvan's much more decentralized. I think the fashion designer comes in much more later in the picture, when you're like, they have made that industry linkage, etc. So they know like, okay, now I want to work with this big brand Khadi or something. But before, at the end of the day, when we identify these women and give them the trainings, they're the ones who are selecting the cloth and designing the clothing themselves. So initially, it's just like empowering them to know like where they need to go to like select proper cloth quality, the threads, etc., because they're the ones who are designing, and then kind of giving them trainings of design from the designer, from like institution designers who kind of tell them like, this is the color theory, these are the seasonal. So, and through those things, we kind of mediate through the notion that it kind of tells them like not to have those romantic notions of the like craftsmanship. Like these women have all the agency and know what they're doing, but they just need to be facilitated around like access to resources and knowledge, etc. Kind of try to mitigate those like assumptions like, oh, I'm the proper designer, so I know much more than this person. But so they can see like, okay, you are like the designer in your own right, but this woman is coming from a legacy of crafts. So her family has been doing this for years. And so she also has like a wealth of knowledge. So we always come from a standpoint of you're sharing your fashion design and expertise. This kind of has like this stitches done by them, but then the design is done by like a proper designer. So that's why it's kind of more like cutting edge, etc., as catering to the urban market. So I think it's just like giving them these trainings so these women know going forward, like which audience that they're working with. Okay, this design is for my villages because they like loud colors, etc. But when I'm catering to the urban market, they like only small motifs and not too heavy design and more like sober, neutral colors. So they kind of keep that in mind. And then like when we did online sessions with them, during COVID time, they got to learn like, okay, in USA, unstitched products don't work. So we just need to sell them scarves or shoes or bangs. They kind of know like, okay, for different audiences, different things sell. So they kind of are much more well-versed of what they need to, how they need to communicate and market themselves. So yeah, as an organization, we just give them the tools of social mobility, so they know how to communicate and take action so that works for them. We don't mitigate any of these things. I mean, we don't like step in and say like, this is how you need to do things. They know like learn by doing. They need to like start like slowly gain confidence by like, okay, I took this baby step. After this, I expanded it this. Okay, I can also do this. Is like taking step by steps and knowing like, oh, I can do this. I can also do this. So then kind of expanding their business that way.
How are you seeing this landing with them? What has their response been? Also, in like from just like the shift that y'all have seen through the work y'all are doing really.
I think I joined them in 2017, but Kaarvan has been since 2004. So they've been there for quite some time. So I think internally too, the team was telling me there's been a whole shift from initially it was like more inward facing, but now they're more outward facing and sharing their knowledge and learnings with the international community. And for the artisans, etc., I think they have communicated that I think there's a whole range when it comes to artisans too. So there's like the women members, which are like much lower. So they're just stepping up and getting to the level of entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs are much more well-versed. Like now they know where to seek to go to market linkages. So I think it's depending on which level you're meeting them. Some of them are like, oh, I got this learning and my brain is kind of overwhelmed with so much knowledge. So they're like, I know it's like some swimming somewhere in my brain, but I think so it takes them a moment to recall. And then when you mention like, oh, I'm talking about this activity, like, oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah, we learned this, and this. But until you don't give them like a recall cue, they have like a hard time because I think the learnings are there. I think they just do it like naturally, like since they're much more hands people, they do it with their hands. And maybe they're not as eloquent when it comes to speaking. Oh, I know these learnings, just like, oh, I just do it.
Yeah, I think they're like the knowledge is, I guess, are more situated in like doing, and then they a lot of times like they don't want to like the communication is the craft in a way. I'm just curious, like, did you have to kind of highlight the positionality of like a designer within the space and like even just like dig deeper into the power structures between like a designer and an artisan? And if you did kind of highlight that, what were some of the ways you introduced it or positioned yourself as like a researcher?
Yeah, I think it's just like they were much more based in the livelihoods part. They didn't have so many participatory activities before. So I think they were just more like traditional like way of like teaching, etc. Then also this notion of them, the agency to the women of how she wants to be represented in telling her stories. So I know whenever I work with other partners too, which are much more conservative, etc. So I think kind of always have to tell them like, I don't think the women want to be represented as, that's why they always are so shy of like TV, etc. Because you always show poverty in such a negative light. You show like torn up clothes or in such a bleak image. And I'm like, I think the women are comfortable with this organization is because they were kind of giving them the agency, like, oh, we want to share your story of strength and not highlight your weaknesses. Maybe your weakness are your struggles, but they don't define you. And then when other people come in and they're just like, oh, we just want the traditional like sob stories to bank on like the consumers' sympathies, etc. And they always want those like really hardcore domestic violence examples. I'm like, I don't think they feel very comfortable even sharing that. So I think when there was the 16 days of action around like gender violence, and I knew these women won't be comfortable. Some of them still face violence, etc., but they don't want to like openly give their names. So giving them the agency of keeping their anonymity, etc. I got them to stitch their emotions, etc. Like, and I think this was also coming from taking inspiration from Brene Brown of like the Atlas of the Heart of mapping emotions. I'm like, I just wanted to like stitch your emotions onto this like roti, etc. And then just like, and that piece can speak to a for 16 days, we had like 16 rotis, which each one. So that way your anonymity is there. You don't have to verbally say like, oh, I experienced X, Y, or Z. It's just like, it's more of an creative expression of your emotion, etc. And kind of saying like, this happened, but I don't want to give a name, etc. because that will just create like a trouble in the community, etc. So I think you just have to find creative solutions and creative hats of like how to do it in a way that kind of you communicate the matter, but then you also are not exposing them to risk and harm.
You also mentioned earlier that there's always this knowledge sharing, like you learn from them, they learn from you. And are there certain times where you found yourself kind of like holding yourself back from trying to explain something? Because that kind of tends to happen naturally sometimes when you're trying to like share knowledge. So along the lines of the power difference question, but like, are there any ways that you have like self-checks for yourself to make sure that, you're not really stepping into their space?
I think it kind of happens more naturally for me. Like I don't have to like self-check myself because they're like, so like being half of my life outside in USA too, I think there's like a language barrier. So I do speak Urdu, but sometimes I kind of mix my Urdu words with Indian words too. They're like, Mashal, this is not an Urdu word. I'm like, oh, okay. I think it's just me being more cosmopolitan and just like making a mixture, etc. So then whenever I am like doing it, so I think it's just like they're also like self-checking, like, oh, this is I think you mean this. I'm like, oh yeah, I do mean that. So I think it's just like it's a better way for me, like, oh, I think you mean this, or I think you have the metaphor wrong. And I'm like, okay. So I think I learn a lot from them too. And I think my Urdu has improved a lot since I've been working with them. So I think that's also good.
That's a wonderful kind of story that you shared. Thanks for sharing that. Like the fact that there was a whole exercise of like them embroidering in the experiences they've had. It's almost like picking up from what they're comfortable and the means they are comfortable with. What are, like, now that you see design practice and the way it's kind of moving, and when I say design, it's like small letter D, not capital D design. Looking forward, like, what are some of the conversations within this space that you wish were happening more? Based on like your experiences and projects that you worked on?
Yeah, I think there's more scope to, I think, incorporate more of like the climate change into the thing. So I think we're slowly with the partners seeing like how we can bring in this whole notion of like recycle and like upcycle things. Like, so even if they have like scraps of cloth left, like how they can use that so they can zero waste, and just so they can even, so they can use that to make products as well. And then also this whole notion, I think this is like a sensitive subject, and I think ideal is doing that much more in Africa. It's like the whole notion of like family planning. But I think guys knowing from the South Asia over here, that's like, even in the urban spaces, like very like shy topic to talk about. So I think like, so we were talking with our partners, etc., like how we can bring about this much more in like future projects. But I think that is a space that more conversation, etc., needs to happen and talk about. Yeah.
A lot about the work Kaarvan is doing, but also curious to hear from your own personal perspective, maybe where are you hoping to be moving towards, or the sort of impact you're hoping to do, and maybe how does a design research approach maybe help you with that or get you there as we like wind down the conversation too?
I think right now I'm just going fluid. I don't have like something mapped out, like, oh, my 5-year work plan is here. But I think I just kind of am just like enjoying like the work that I'm doing right now, and just having like family close by. And I think I'm kind of happy where I am right now, because kind of with this thing, I also have exposure like with UN Women. We'll be soon opening this notion of climate change and remote workshopping with the rural community more. So I think it's kind of interesting space of like how being in here, I can like with you guys kind of connect with like international colleagues and friends and kind of see how we can bring much more positive change and impact here locally, but also see like how to like cross-pollinate and see like whether it's in Sri Lanka or whether it's in Belgium, like see what work is being there and kind of help each other out in those ways. So
Just one more question around that space. Like, as you're kind of personally seeing a lot of like design research or design happening in the South Asian context, do you see any kind of emerging areas of practice like that? Maybe you're already kind of driving that a little bit in this space, but do you see any other projects or any other like peers doing some interesting work in this space that you're like excited about and kind of looking forward to?
I think there's like human-centered design. I don't have that much exposure over here, so I would be excited to see what you guys are doing and learn more from you guys, because I think you guys are working in similar spaces, like whether it's like in India or Bangalore or like in Sri Lanka or even like in USA. So just to see what you guys are doing, and I think there's like overlaps, etc. So I think just to see that, but I think one thing, and I think it's like going back on the topic of the conversation that needs to happen much more, I think in Pakistan or maybe in South Asia in general too, is like the whole notion of like decolonization, like this whole mindset of like, oh, if a white person says that even like our own community gives it much more value, I'm like, hey, I am talking about empathy and human-centered design too, but if someone else says that and they're from like a much more privileged background from a different country, they give it much more value. So I think this whole notion of like we need to kind of challenge that, etc. too. So yeah.
Great. Like the last point you also brought up about using platforms like this. So yeah, hopefully we get to keep meeting more practitioners and get to also share and learn from each other through things like this, which is really exciting. So yeah, maybe with that, we can wind down this conversation. Any like last thoughts we can want to share at this stage? Leave some space for that.
Yeah, I thought I would just kind of appreciate you for like making this time. Like, I think we just had like a very rich, insightful conversation, especially for me. It's like Friday morning, so it's like I'm totally inspired to get my day started. So yeah, appreciate like all the kind of stories and projects you shared and made the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, I think I'm just really thankful for your time and for the conversation and for all these wonderful insights that you shared. And I think something that's going to stick with me today from our conversation was this notion about how you spoke about different things, such as like you're talking about building trust, you were talking about people letting their guard down, you were talking about connecting with people. And for me, I feel like a lot of times design tends to be associated with, oh, here's a cool thing I made, or like this is a product, or this is like a really well-designed thing that, you know, is gonna sell really quickly. But also thinking about design as that way of facilitating conversation and making connections and actually trying to unpack what it is for human to talk, and then have that, then decide the course of what an outcome or a product or a thing is going to be. I think like that was really beautiful for me. So thank you.
Thank you guys for having me and starting this platform. I'm really excited to like listen in and tune in to more conversations that you guys have, and wishing you all the best to your like hopefully this podcast coming into reality and staying connected with you guys.
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.